Cycle Street Wraith. Fetch, Shock, Thoughtseize. Okay, I'm at 13 life. Death's Shadow has been a popular card in Modern for a long time. Death's Shadow often requires a deck to be built around dealing damage to yourself quickly in order to play a Death's Shadow in the early turns of a game. Grixis Death's Shadow may be the most well-known Shadow deck, but Jund Death's Shadow is really the hot new deck in Modern right now. So why Jund and not Grixis? Grixis Death's Shadow has been the most popular Death's Shadow deck in Modern for a while. So why is everyone making the switch from Grixis to Jund? First, Wizards of the Coast has printed a lot of powerful new cards lately, and a lot of those have slotted nicely into a Jund list. Some of these cards include Renin 6, Nurturing Peatland, Collector Oof, Once Upon a Time, Plague Engineer, and Veil of Summer. Plague Engineer has also found a home in Grixis Death's Shadow, but Grixis has had less powerful updates to their deck. Once Upon a Time allows Jund Shadow players to keep riskier hands without being heavily punished. In the past, it was common to keep hands with one land if you had Mishra's Bauble and/or Street Wraith. Once Upon a Time allows you to dig even further in your deck for that second land. If you aren't using Once Upon a Time for this purpose, it is also great in the late game when you are trying to find a threat. In the Grixis version, most of the time you have to hope you draw the threat you need, but in the Jund version, you have access to Once Upon a Time and traverse the Uvenwald to find exactly what you need. Gaining access to 3 new powerful sideboard cards is another important reason that Jund Shadow is the hot new deck in Modern. Collector Oof effectively shuts down different Urza strategies and Tron, while Veil of Summer is an extremely versatile sideboard option. It's strong against decks with counterspells like Blue-White Control. It's equally, if not more powerful, in black-based removal and hand-hate decks. For example, it's great against the Mirror, Traditional Jund, and Grixis Death's Shadow. Finally, Jund Death's Shadow got an important new tool that Grixis Death's Shadow did not: Nurturing Peatland. Grixis could hypothetically utilize Fiery Islet. However, black is the most important color in these decks. Therefore, Fiery Islet is not actually played in Grixis Shadow. The Horizon land cycle printed in Modern Horizons has had a significant impact on Modern, and most of them have found a home in numerous decks. The typical downside of these lands is that they deal damage to their controllers. However, it isn't surprising that a land that deals damage to you is a powerful option in a Death's Shadow deck. Additionally, Nurturing Peatland provides additional card advantage by being able to sacrifice the land and draw a card. Let's start off by looking at the creatures. The deck includes 4 Tarmogoyf, 4 Street Wraith, 4 of the deck's namesake card, Death's Shadow, and 1 Hazaret the Fervent. Death's Shadow is the obvious inclusion in the deck because we are building the deck around the card. Street Wraith is also essential in a Death's Shadow deck because of the card advantage and free life loss. Tarmogoyf is the second big threat in the Jund version of Death's Shadow decks. Tarmogoyf usually has a high power and toughness as early as turn 2 because of Mishra's Bauble and thought-seizing your opponent. The final creature slot is often a one-of copy of a powerful threat. Some popular options in this spot are Tireless Tracker or Hazaret the Fervent. Tireless Tracker is an option to provide additional card advantage by making clues from excess lands and turning those clues into extra cards. Hazaret is a great threat when you want your extra creature to be an aggressive finisher. Hazaret is also a good option if you expect to play against non-white removal decks. White removal, of course, being a threat to Hazaret because of Path to Exile. She's also a good option against Ensnaring Bridge because you can discard cards to deal 2 damage to your opponent. A lot of the spells in this deck are similar to a traditional Jund list. Inquisition of Kozilek and Thoughtseize give us perfect information about what our opponent is playing and how their hand lines up with our own. We can pick apart their hand and get rid of our opponent's problematic cards before they cause a problem. Fatal Push and Assassin's Trophy are some of the most popular removal spells in Modern, especially in green-black decks. Fatal Push can normally kill most creatures in the Modern format, and we have Assassin's Trophy for the times Fatal Push isn't good enough. Kolaghan's Command is an all-around good spell. It is extremely versatile with 4 modes to choose from, and it is especially good in formats with fair deck or artifact decks, which we have both of right now. Moving into shadow-specific spells, we will find Temur Battle Rage, Traverse the Uvenwald, and Mishra's Bauble. Temur Battle Rage is typically a gotcha moment when your opponent leaves a Death's Shadow unblocked. Temur Battle Rage threatens lethal much earlier in the game, which is why Jund Death's Shadow is a more aggressive deck than more traditional Jund lists. Sometimes Death's Shadow lists run out of resources quickly, which is why cards like Mishra's Bauble and Traverse the Uvenwald are important cards in the deck. Mishra's Bauble provides card advantage, gives you additional information, grows your Tarmogoyf, and enables Delirium. Traverse the Uvenwald is good in the early game if you are short on lands, and great in the late game when you enable Delirium. Sometimes your opponent can deal with 1 or 2 of your threats, and Traverse helps you find exactly what you need in any given situation. Maybe you need to tutor for another Death's Shadow to ensure lethal on your next turn. Maybe you need to tutor for a Street Wraith in the mirror because you need to play around a fatal push to win. Or maybe you just need to tutor for a fetch land to make your Death's Shadow power lethal. The options are endless. So let's talk more about using your life total as a resource. This is the most difficult part of the deck. Using your life total as a resource is unique to Death's Shadow decks. And most people who have never played with Death's Shadow before have never had to treat their life as a resource in this critical a way. Learning this new skill of when to fetch and when to shock versus when to cycle Street Wraith and play a basic is what makes this deck difficult. You need to think a lot more about previously simple aspects of the game, like fetching and shocking. Each point of damage you take and when you take it matters. Life total utilization also changes based on what deck you are playing against. When you are playing against Burn, you rarely want to do any damage to yourself. After all, your opponent is going to do that for you. When playing against Jund, you need to take into account the damage they will deal with their creatures in addition to the damage you will deal to yourself. If you Thoughtseize your opponent and see multiple Tarmogoyfs, you might want to go easy on your fetching and shocking, especially without an answer to those creatures. In those situations, you have to know that your opponent is going to deal enough damage to you to allow you to play 1 or more Death's Shadows without the need to hurt yourself. There are a few quick tips to any specific deck. Here are a few you might not be aware of when first looking at this deck. Be aware of how combat damage works while blocking with a Death's Shadow. Let's say your opponent attacks with 2 Tarmogoyfs that are at 4/5. Your Death's Shadow is at 4/4. If you block one of those Tarmogoyfs with your Death's Shadow and allow the other one to deal damage to you, your Death's Shadow will turn into an 8/8 in the damage step and survive combat. Target yourself with Mishra's Bauble before fetching to see if you want the card on top. You can hold on to Street Wraiths for a while instead of cycling them. You can use them in the future to save a Death's Shadow from a lightning bolt. Often, in the mirror or against Grixis Death's Shadow, you can cast Street Wraith as a threat to win the game because it doesn't die to Fatal Push or Lightning Bolt, and it can't be blocked most of the time. Let's take a look at sideboarding. Building your sideboard is an extremely important aspect of playing this deck. Mid-range decks have the ability to drastically change their sideboards based on what decks you expect to see at a tournament. In the current format, sideboards might include the following: Collector Oof for Wurza matchups, Alpine Moon for Tron and Valakut, Veil of Summer for Jund Grixis Shadow, The Mirror, Blue-White Control, or any other black or blue-based mid-range control deck. Collective Brutality for Burn and other aggro decks, as well as Stoneforge Mystic decks and control decks. Ren and 6 for control and mid-range decks, as well as Infect and Humans. Plague Engineer for small creature decks and tribal strategies. These are only a few examples of how you can tailor your sideboard for popular decks in the modern format. Also, these sideboard spots are likely to change from one tournament to another. While I've posted a deck list, as always, in this video's description with a suggested sideboard, it's important, nay vital, to be familiar with what Modern looks like each week, or what decks are popular at your local game store. This deck is a powerful option in the current Modern metagame for the reasons previously outlined. It's a healthy mix of an aggressive strategy and a mid-range strategy, with the ability to tailor your sideboard to beat a majority of the decks you might face at an event. No matter what, always remember, when in doubt, Jund 'em out. Special thanks again to Allison Warfield, this video's professional consultant, who wrote and developed this tech. If you'd like more content from Allie, you can check out the links I have placed in this episode's description. And thanks as well to our editor, Patrick Lickman. I hope very much this video has been of some help to you. What deck would you like to see a tech on next? Let me know in the comments below.